Jack Birmingham. Here. Steve Hintz. Jason Lasky.
Here.
Sue Ponick.
Here.
Archie Stam.
Here.
Lori Palmieri.
Here. Next, we'll take a motion and a second on consent for approval of the minutes. March 18th.
Second.
Any discussion on the minutes?
Hey, Lori, can you move your mic a little bit closer to you?
Is that better? Is that better?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So next we'll move on to new business 20-12, approve amendment number 2 to TID development agreement with Merge LLC for redevelopment of parcels H, I, and J within the Marion Road redevelopment. Did we have anyone registered or send in any comments on this item?
I did not get any.
No.
Don't have anyone here, so.
Move that motion.
Second.
And discussion.
Construction date?
They want to start this summer. They moved the construction and the completion dates. That's the big change in the development agreement is the timing. So I wanted to highlight that to the RDA. Instead of June, it would be September of 2020 to start parcel H, and that changes the order. It used to be J, which is down by the water, used to be the first one. Now it's H, up by Pearl. So that's the number 1 project they want to start this summer, and I think that has a lot to do with the food co-op meeting their goals for getting their facility built.
Am I going to rest for 1 second?
And then
Okay, we're getting a lot of feedback. I don't know about you, Jason.
Yeah, the acoustics in the room.
Is there someone on a phone call maybe that needs to mute?
I'm on my computer.
Do we have any that called in, Andrea?
No.
No.
Okay.
I'm not getting feedback as much as just it's echoing and it just seems like bad acoustics.
Yeah, so maybe just talk closer into the mic for everybody.
You want me to mute? Should I mute them for a little bit?
Mute unless you talk.
Yeah.
So could you guys mute unless you're ready to speak, and then we'll check with you before we close anything out? Is that better? Give me a thumbs up. All right.
All right. Previously, they had planned on building J first, but now they're moving it to H, and they're moving the construction of that date back about 3 months. The more significant pieces are I and J, and that's what they've moved back a little farther, as I've identified in the memo, and the completion date could be as much as 2 years later. When they first approached staff with that proposal, staff wanted to make sure that they were still on the hook for doing all 3 parcels, and that's kind of like the package deal. If they're going to get delay of the project, then we're going to hold them to a disincentive that if they don't do all the pieces for H, I, and J, then they get a reduction in the PAYGO payment that they could receive, so that if they only do H, then they only get 15%. If they get H and another one, then they could get up to 20, and they only get back to the 25% if they do all 3 parcels, and that's how the original agreement was 25%.
Mr. Hintz joined.
Hello.
Hi, is that Steve Hintz on the line?
Hi. Hi. This is Steve Hintz.
Hi, Steve. Could we ask you to mute your call, and then we can check in with you before we close an item out? How's that?
Okay.
But Alan, they're scheduled to do Project H with the food pantry and the 4 stories of multifamily and start construction
That would be
June or
this-
July and get
this
it done
summer.
September of 2021.
Yes.
That's almost a done deal.
Yes, well, and I can tell you that they've council has approved the specific implementation plan about a month ago, and they submitted their building plans about 2 weeks ago, and that set of plans was probably $500,000 to put that set of plans together. So they're heavily invested into this project at this point. We haven't issued the building permit quite yet. I think there's a few things still to work out on the site plan. And then we expect to close on the properties. And I'm glad Ms. Brandt is up here because I think everything is ready for the closing as well, but they were waiting to see what happens with this before they actually close.
Makes me happy.
So Sue, Steve, and Jason, do you have any questions or discussion points?
Originally, my question was going to be about impact, but that was written down in the statement, so I didn't have any additional questions besides that. I did have one question on the handouts. Basically, pages 17 and 18 were blank, except for maybe a header. Is that the way they were supposed to look?
Those pages are blank until we fill them in with the updated pro forma from Ellers, and they haven't finished that yet, but they do have all the numbers. And
Okay.
that'll be supplied by one of our financial consultant.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I got all the information.
Yes.
Jason?
I'm perfectly fine. Thank you. That's great information. I look forward to them building on that site and creating a nice tech center. That's great.
Steve? You may
I
need
have
to,
one question. Why do we use TID sometimes and TIF other times?
Alan will attempt to answer that, and that TID is the geographic boundary tax increment district, and TIF is TIF, and that's the financing mechanism that goes along with it,
Okay,
with the district.
any further discussion on 20-12? All right, can we please take the roll?
Birmingham. Hintz. Steve.
Steve, you might need to
Hello?
unmute. Are you there?
This is Steve Hintz. The sound is not good. I am voting yes.
Okay. Lasky. Jason. Lasky.
Yes. Yes.
Sue Ponick.
yes.
Archie Stam.
Aye.
Tom Belter.
Aye.
Lori Palmieri.
Aye.
Motion carried 7-0.
All right, next on the agenda is a discussion about community gardens. And I had asked for this to be placed on back in January. Unfortunately, a family member was in the hospital. I wasn't able to make it. So here we are in May having a discussion, very timely, about community gardens. So several citizens had emailed or called regarding questions about the ability of community garden groups to have some security with the community gardens and whether or not there might be an opportunity for permanency or longer term use, given that we've had a couple of gardens that have had some success on interim use, but then along came some, RFPs and some options for developers to use those lots, and so they were displaced. And so there is a current one, I think, Menominee South, that They have, if I'm understanding this correctly, Darlene, they have until October, correct? Correct. So they had expressed an interest in having the ability to perhaps obtain one of the RDA-owned or city-owned lots for permanent use. And there was another neighborhood association as well. And then I got a phone call last week as in addition. So some cities, and I'll use Milwaukee as an example, have allowed groups to use some of the vacant lots. And then once they show some success and some good stewardship, give them the option of applying for a longer term or permanent, I guess, lease, if you will. And so I just bring that to the group for discussion. I might also point out that in the sustainability plan for the city of Oshkosh, there is a section in there that talks about local food. The most recent call that I received from a citizen was, expressing encouragement for groups to do this, given, what some believe to be perhaps maybe a shortage of fresh foods in the near future. And we've had those discussions kind of around the edges in the past. And so, yeah, we just wanted to see what this group thought about some of those vacant lots that we have being utilized on a more long-term and or permanent basis.
We've done
So
that
Lori,
in
the
past,
vacant
haven't we?
lots that you're talking about, are they owned by the city?
The groups didn't specifically say owned by the city, but we're asking the city to partner with them in some way. So we do have, I think, a spreadsheet of a number of them that, may or may not necessarily be appropriate. And I don't know if Mr. Davis would like to chime in on that or not.
I can add a little history to it in that we, on the Jefferson property, that's where we allowed that for several years. And then we went through the RFP process, awarded an option to the developer. We asked the garden to relocate, and unfortunately the developer didn't proceed. So that garden went out of operation, and it's not currently in operation, unfortunately, even though it had been well used before. But when the developer didn't follow through in that particular case, we lost that opportunity. And I think that's what. And then Grove Street is the other one where they have there on Menominee South. That's a property where we've split off one parcel right now for that twin dominium, and there's a potential for 3 or 4 more houses along there over the next 3 or 4 years. Not necessarily sure there's room for a community garden long-term at that location. But you're right, there's other pieces of land, either entire lots or parts of lots, that the city or the RDA owns that could be used for a community garden. Unfortunately, it's really hard to predict the future as to how long that's going to be. The community garden takes quite a substantial investment, I'd think, from the neighbors to get it to the point where it's growing good crops, and you hate to abandon that type of thing. I mean, I've grown enough vegetables in my life. Once you get to a garden, you don't want to have to relocate it and give it up. So I think that's where the communities, the neighborhoods are coming from, and that they have to invest quite a lot. We require raised beds. They do a lot of maintenance for us that potentially could help offset some of the RDA's holding costs. But in the long term, the RDA is in the business of getting these properties redeveloped. So is community garden the long-term plan, or is it the interim plan? And the RDA has talked about this multiple times, and nobody has a good idea how long that interim plan is going to last, unless we say we're going to do this for at least 5 or 10 years, and then we're not going to even issue an RFP. We won't entertain any kind of offers to purchase. It's going to be a community garden, just so they have that certainty for that period of time.
What's the precedence on time periods that we've typically gone into for those gardens? Is there a term that we typically put on that?
It's year to year.
Year to year, okay.
And they were, as I recall, that first one was And I think we should even go back further too. You know, Stevens Park has a very long history of a community garden, but it's in the city park, and so they don't have concerns about longevity so much because they're not in danger of development and it being taken away. The conditional use permit, I think, was what was granted to that original group on Jefferson Street. There was about a $3,500 grant or investment as far as financial, but there were 56 beds built. It was a partnership with, if I recall, Habitat volunteers and the neighbors. Many relationships formed, hundreds of pounds of produce. There were some accessible beds for wheelchair access as well. And I think, you know, with year to year, it makes, as Alan was saying, makes it a little bit daunting to put that kind of investment and energy in for a short term like that, to really build not just the capacity for produce, but also those relationships and those teams, you know, to form for the maintenance purposes as well.
So it serves multiple roles in a neighborhood.
Absolutely.
And since the RDA owns most of these properties, the RDA can structure a lease any way they see fit when it comes to under what circumstances it can be used as a community garden.
Is it okay if I say something?
You're so small. Andrea, can
think
you
it is-
enlarge that
I mean-
screen?
I don't know how.
Okay.
What,
that's all
what
right.
I guess I'd like to see maybe is more of a,
He muted himself. There you go.
you can hear me or you can't?
Now I can, yes.
Okay, sorry. I think that it sounds great, Lori. I think that there's like, what I guess I'd like to see is maybe a framework or a proposal put before us to maybe talk about a little bit more seriously. I think it's a great idea, and I think that through that process we might be able to come to some type of a refinement of that idea. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I did see that the APA referenced a document that came out of a law school public policy think tank in Minnesota that was from like 2017 that had some best practices. And my apologies, I had intended to get that out to you folks prior, but some of the things that have been proposed by neighbors and citizens interested have been things like looking at a 5 to 10 year, you know, once they have a successful year, interim year, then applying for like a 5 or 10 year period, or the ability to purchase the lot and, you know, have that ownership for a longer period. Those are just two of the things that came out of that, the local discussions. So I hear what you're saying, some kind of proposal that we could actually look at in terms of what we have and what would be appropriate. And I'm not quite sure if the ones that we as a group would deem appropriate would be desirable by those folks either. So
It might
Each
take a
one's gonna
little.
have a story too, right?
Mhm.
absolutely.
The terms will be different for each, right?
HNI want to help with that?
That's a good question.
I also wondered if maybe Growing Oshkosh would want to get involved.
And I think they would be an asset to that discussion as well. I believe that right now their reach is amongst the schools, if I understand their kind of target areas. And this was kind of going beyond the schools. I think the ownership of the effort that's been put into it, and being that we've now had two groups who, you know, have put a lot of effort and energy and had positive results, but yet the ending was kind of sad, right? I mean, good that we had proposals coming in for development, but sad for those groups that they weren't able to continue. So hopefully we can find a way. Thank you.
Would there be any reason that we would need to do some infrastructure, like making sure that there's water available on the site?
Yeah, that has been a challenge, I think. I know our neighborhood space that we use for the raised bed gardens, we have a rain barrel, but we have a structure on that site that we're able to capture that and use it. But some of the other sites have struggled with bringing in water. I'll share, in grad school, I did some urban agriculture study down in Havana that those lots that were provided in the urban areas, they did have access to water, which obviously makes that easier. Not to say that the groups wouldn't do it, but I know, I believe Stevens Park is one that has a tank, a larger tank that's brought in. Does that sound familiar, Darlene?
Yep, they just bought that through the Great Neighborhoods program.
Okay.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So Go H&I don't know if you heard that, Sue, or not. Andrea was saying that through Go H&I, they, Stevens Park was able to purchase one of those larger water tanks.
Okay.
So those are some things that in that study and of best practices was also referenced, was, considerations regarding water as well.
The other group that might have an interest in helping out would be somebody like Master Gardeners. And does UW Extension still have ag agents? I guess where I'm going with this is maybe we bring together a coalition of people to put that plan together, Jason.
Well,
Jason, you froze on us.
um,
Oh, there you're back with us.
at the end of the day, I guess I'm not going to direct who brings it to the RDA, whether it's a association that wants to get something, propose something, or whether it's some other community organization. My question is, do you think we need to drive this, or do you think that this can come as it's becomes wanted?
Well, it's desired now, and so I did say that I would bring it forward for those who have that desire, and so I guess we need to have some kind of additional policy in place, or at least give those groups an opportunity to come and be specific about what they'd like. So I think I hear you saying you want to hear more directly from them.
Or select a chair to, I guess, forward with a committee to develop something. I mean, if it's regarding our property and we're making a determination of what we want to do with that property, then maybe it is at some level our responsibility to consider that and throw it out there. There's, like you said, there's a number of ways to look at it, from permanent situation to a very limited situation. And I think that they're all worthy of discussion.
Okay, so I guess we will bring this back to the next meeting.
And I will bring it up to Go H&I, because I have a meeting with them later this week, so I'll see where they
Okay.
are, because they're usually our connection to the neighborhood associations, and they'd probably have a perspective on that I'd like to hear, and they have the neighborhood alliance meetings when they get started again, so that'd be a good topic for them to talk about. And maybe
And
there's a group of people that
may
would like to work on that.
benefit their goals as well, because there were some areas that didn't necessarily have a recognized neighborhood association, but they did have people who were interested in doing a garden.
Yes.
So I'd hate for us to limit it to only those established neighborhood associations if there are specific gardening groups. And to Sue's point, Master Gardeners were heavily involved with advising that first group over on Jefferson Street and providing volunteers in that process. All right. Well, thank you. So next, we'll take a motion to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye?
Motion to go into closed
Closed session.
Yes,
Before
we
we
do.
adjourn.
Oh, we have that
In the
after
wrong
the
order?
adjournment. Oops,
An agenda.
that's okay. So let's do our motion to go into closed session before we adjourn then.
From my adjournment motion. I'd like to make a motion for the redevelopment authority to convene a closed session pursuant to section 19.85, para 1. To confer with legal counsel who will render advice concerning strategy to be adopted with respect to litigation in which the city is or is likely to become involved in Pro Basketball Inc. and or property located at 12.
Do we have a second? All right, please take the roll.
Birmingham,
Aye.
Hintz,
Aye.
Lasky,
Aye.
Ponick,
Hi.
Stam,
Aye.
Belter,
Aye.
Palmieri.
Aye.
Motion carried 7-0.
All right, now we'll take a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn?
Second?
All in favor?
Can we do that? Is that okay?
Is that the right order?
Yep.
adjourn.
Okay.
Yeah.
Aye.
All right.